Have you ever reached the end of a perfectly normal day and felt completely exhausted, even though nothing obviously terrible has happened? You went to work, you answered messages, you replied to emails, you had conversations, you went to the shops, you smiled at the right times, you replied to the person who needed something. You made approximately 12,000 tiny decisions, most of them invisible to everyone else. And then, by the time you finally got a moment to yourself, your whole body felt full. Not just tired, full. Full of noise, full of people, full of tone changes, facial expressions, background sounds, emotional tension, bright lights, subtle expectations, and the strange little pressure of being a woman who notices everything. And perhaps you've asked yourself, why am I like this? Why can I handle big things sometimes, but feel completely undone by a crowded shopping center? Why do I notice when someone's energy changes before they say a word? Why does a text message with a slightly different tone sit in my body for hours and hours? Why do I need silence after socializing and like I need to decompress? Why does modern life feel just so very loud to me? And the question really underneath all of this is usually, am I too sensitive? In this first episode of Sensitive and the City, we're going to talk about sensory processing sensitivity. I know it's a mouthful. Let's just call it SPS, and what it actually means to be a sensitive woman in the modern world. Not in a fluffy woo-woo way, not in a you are a magical forest creature who must avoid all human responsibilities kind of way, because no. We have emails, bills, families, bodies, businesses, laundry. We have people asking what's for dinner while standing in front of a full fridge. We are talking about sensitivity in real life. And sensory processing sensitivity, well, it simply means that your nervous system processes information more deeply. That information might be sensory, like sound, light, texture, smell, temperature, or visual clutter. Think sitting all day under fluorescent lighting. No, thank you. But it also might be emotional, like a shift in someone's tone, a change in their mood, tension in a room, or the feeling that something is not quite being said. Like you can feel it, but maybe you're not quite sure. It also might be social, like reading body language, tracking facial expressions, noticing micro reactions, or sensing when someone's words and energy just do not match. And for many sensitive women, that this has been happening for so long that you do not even realize how much you're processing. You just know you're tired. You just know that you need some space. You just know certain places leave you feeling scrambled. And you just know that you can feel the emotional weather of a room before anyone else seems to notice there's even a cloud. And you know what? I remember at one point in my life, I was so overwhelmed by the sensitive noise and the impact that a modern life was having. And this is about the time when Orange Was the New Black came out. And I was seriously thinking, I feel like I'm envious of these women. They don't have to worry about anything. They can just live their lives in that gel, obviously. I'm not condoning, breaking the law just to get a break. Because here is the important part that I think a lot of us overlook. Sensitivity is not the same as weakness, and it's not the same as drama. Sensitivity is certainly not the same as being difficult, needy, fragile, or incapable. Sensitivity simply means your system is receiving and processing more data, more information, more input than a regular non-sensitive person. The problem is not that you notice so much. The problem is that you probably haven't really understood what to do with that everything that you notice and that you have a connection with. And when a deeply processing nervous system has no regulation, no boundaries, no recovery time, and actually no permission to say, this is too much for me, sensitivity can actually start to feel like a curse. But it's not a curse. It's just a capacity, one that needs structure and one that needs care. You also need some discernment. And you also need to stop treating your nervous system like it's being inconvenient simply because it refuses to pretend that modern life is normal. Side note and newsflash to all listeners out there, this is not normal. Our life at the moment is not normal. Because, let's be honest, modern life is a whole lot. And sensitive women are often the first to feel the cost of that. So today we're going to unpack what sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS, really means, how it shows up in your everyday life, and why so many sensitive women override themselves, and how to begin working with your sensitivity rather than constantly apologizing for it or trying to manage it. Because you're not here to become less sensitive, all right? This is the way you were born. We're going to get into this. You are here to become more self-led. So let's begin, actually, at the beginning with what SPS actually is. Let's look at it. So SPS is a temperament trait. It describes a nervous system that processes information deeply and responds strongly to subtle stimuli. Now, that does not mean every sensitive person is the same. Some sensitive people are more affected by sound, some are more affected by emotional energy, some are more affected by conflict, some are more affected by crowds, and some are more affected by lights and smells, textures, mess, pressure, expectations, sudden changes, or too many people needing too many things at once. And some of us get the deluxe variety pack. Lovely. Very generous of life. But at the core of it, SPS simply means that your system is not just noticing the obvious, it's noticing the details or the things that are hidden to non-sensitive people. The tiny shift in someone's voice, the awkward pause in a conversation, the way the room feels after an argument, even if everyone is pretending that nothing actually happened, the flickering light above your head, the smell of someone's perfume from 3 suburbs away, the visual clutter on the kitchen bench, the emotional temperature of your inbox, the tone in a message that everyone else says is probably fine, but your body has already built a tiny courtroom around it. So this is why being sensitive can feel so confusing, because you're not always responding to one obvious thing. You're often responding to layers. And this is one of the reasons sensitive women can look perfectly capable from the outside while feeling completely overstimulated on the inside. You may be functioning, you may be productive, you may be kind, you may be showing up, you may be everybody's friends. You may be the person everyone comes to because you're thoughtful, aware, emotionally intelligent, and seemingly very good at holding everything together. But inside your system, there is an awful lot happening. You are tracking the conversation, you're noticing the tension, you're sensing the moods, you're remembering what needs to be done. You are aware of the noise. You are adjusting yourself to keep the peace. You are monitoring how someone responded to you. You're not trying to seem difficult, and you're making sure that everyone else is okay. And Then you wonder why you're so exhausted. Honestly. This is why the phrase too sensitive is so misleading, because most sensitive women are not reacting to nothing. They're reacting to more than other people are consciously registering. That does not mean your interpretation is always correct. So that's really an important note here. Just because you notice a shift does not always mean the story your mind tells you about it is true. Someone's tone might change because they're annoyed with you. That's true. Like, that's real. Or it might change because they're tired, hungry, distracted, stressed, hormonal, trying not to sneeze, or mentally calculating whether they remembered to pay their bills. This is where discernment comes in. Because sensitivity gives you the information, but it does not always give you the full story. And that's why regulation matters so much. Because when your nervous system is calm enough, you can notice information without immediately becoming the information. You can say, something feels different here, without instantly deciding, I've done something wrong, oh my God, they hate me, the relationship is doomed, and I should probably move to Tasmania. Although Tasmania is lovely, but you see the point. A regulated, sensitive woman can notice without spiraling. An overloaded, sensitive woman often notices, absorbs, interprets, personalizes, internalizes, and then carries it all. And that's the difference. And that difference is literally everything. Let's talk about why this matters so much for modern women. Because sensitivity does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a life, inside of a body, inside of a heart and a mind. And the modern woman's life is often loaded with invisible demands. There is obviously the practical load. Work, money, home, family, health, aging parents, children, appointments, food, planning, technology, passwords, admin, remembering birthdays, remembering the things someone casually mentioned 6 weeks ago, but somehow you now became responsible for? I don't know. Then there is the emotional load. Who needs support? Who is upset? Who is withdrawing? Who is annoyed? Who needs some reassurance from me? Who is pretending they're fine but definitely is not fine? Who is likely to explode if you say the wrong thing? Who needs you to make the atmosphere lighter and more comfortable for them? Who expects you to absorb their mood but not have one of your own? Then there is the sensory load. Phones pinging, people talking, traffic, screens, lights, background noise, clutter, social media, news, music in the shops, people walking too close to you, the strange violence of someone watching videos on loudspeaker in public, Sydney trains, I'm talking to you. Honestly, jail, not actual jail, but kind of like spiritually and energetically jail. Please refer to The Orange is the New Black. And then there's the identity load. Be successful, but not too intense, right? Be nurturing, but not depleted. Be attractive, but not vain. Be spiritual, but not weird and woo-woo, not crunchy, Be emotionally available, but not too needy. Have some boundaries, but don't upset anyone. Be calm, be productive, kind, regulated, hydrated, moisturized, financially literate, and apparently also have a morning routine that involves lemon water and becoming one with the sunrise. Good Lord, it is a lot. And when you are sensitive, you are not just moving through all of that. You are absorbing the impact of it. Your system is processing the environment. It's processing the emotions, the expectations, and the pace, the pressure and the unspoken rules of the patriarchy. So If you've ever thought, gosh, I don't know why I'm so tired. I didn't actually do that much today. I want you to consider that maybe you did do a lot. You processed a lot, you felt a lot, you managed a lot. I'm inserting all of the emotional labor of the family here. You filtered a lot, you adapted a lot, and you may not have been lifting bricks, but your nervous system was doing emotional CrossFit in the background. And this is where many sensitive women start to blame themselves because they think, why can't I just handle what everyone else handles? But that same question assumes everyone is processing the same amount of information, but they're not. Some people can walk into a noisy room and just hear noise. A sensitive person with SPS may hear noise, sure, but they can also feel the tension, notice the lighting, register the smells, track the conversation, sense the mood, pick up the awkwardness between two people in the corner, and suddenly become aware that their bra strap is doing something personally offensive. Same room, different experience. This does not make you necessarily better than anyone else, and it does not make you more evolved. I think it's important to mention here because, the term empath and highly sensitive person has kind of been hijacked a little bit. So it's important to say that it doesn't mean that you're spiritually superior, which is always a trapdoor with glitter around it. Fairy glitter. Unicorn glitter. What it simply means is that your system may be more responsive to subtle input. And that response needs support because sensitivity without support can become overwhelm. And sensitivity without boundaries can become resentment. And sensitivity without discernment becomes anxiety. And sensitivity without recovery becomes burnout. Don't ask me how I know. And sensitivity without self-trust can become a life where everyone else's needs, moods, and opinions become louder than your own. This is especially important for women because so many of us were trained out of our own signals. We were taught to be nice. We were taught to be polite. We were taught to smile more, to make people comfortable, to not make a fuss, to keep being happy even though we're uncomfortable, to keep the peace, to consider everyone else, don't be rude, don't be too dramatic. Oh my gosh, stop being so much, right? Just don't be too much. To not say, I actually don't want to. And if you already are highly sensitive, that conditioning can run very deep. Because you can feel the discomfort when someone is disappointed, and you sense when someone is annoyed. You read the mood shift when you say no, and you can feel the emotional consequence of actually having a boundary with people. So instead of honoring your own limit, you override it because maybe sometimes it just feels like it's easier in the moment. You say yes when your body says no, and you stay longer than you want to. You respond when you need rest. You let people talk at you because you can feel that they need to be heard. You soften your truth because you feel maybe someone's going to react. You make yourself more convenient because being inconvenient feels unsafe. You make yourself small so that other people can be big. And then your body starts to speak loud and louder and louder and louder. It might start with some fatigue, irritability, some brain fog, maybe some tears, some tension, shutdown, anxiety, a strange desire to cancel every plan and live inside a weighted blanket with snacks and absolutely zero witnesses. Again, understandable, but also information. Your body is not betraying you. Your body is often the last honest voice in the room. And that is why, in this work, we do not treat sensitivity as something you have to conquer. We treat it as something you have to learn how to partner with. See it as your future best friend. Because your sensitivity has wisdom in it, and it can help you notice what matters. It can help you read a room, and it can help you connect deeply with other people. It can help you create, lead, teach, parent, heal, guide, write, be creative, coach, run businesses, support, and understand people in ways that are incredibly powerful, literally world-changing. But only if you're not constantly drowning in it. Because let's be honest, a gift without regulation does not feel much like a gift. It feels like too much. And this is where we need to separate sensitivity from overload, because they are not the same thing. Sensitivity is your capacity to perceive and process deeply, and overload is what happens when the amount of input exceeds your current capacity to process it. And that distinction matters, because if you believe sensitivity is the problem, you will try, fill in the blank, to become less sensitive. You will try to harden yourself. You will shame yourself. You will compare yourself to people who seem unbothered. And you'll force yourself through situations that your body is begging you to approach differently. You may even start numbing or masking who you truly are. And you might start to use things like food, sugar, alcohol, scrolling, doom scrolling, overworking, constant busyness, rescuing other people, or even spiritual bypassing. With pretending you're fine because admitting you are not fine would require changing something. But if you understand that overload is the problem, not sensitivity itself, then the work changes, because then the question becomes, well, what is overloading my system? What do I need less of? What do I need more of? Where am I ignoring my own signals? Where am I absorbing what is not mine to take on? Where am I performing okay instead of being honest? Where do I need recovery, and where do I need to set a boundary? And maybe most importantly, where do I need to stop explaining myself to people who benefit from me having no limits? That is a very different conversation, and it's much more empowering. Let's make this practical. How does SPS actually show up in everyday life? Well, it can show up as needing quiet after a busy day, not because you're antisocial, because your system needs to digest the day. It can show up as feeling physically affected by clutter, not because you're precious, because visual noise is still noise. It can show up as being deeply moved by music, art, nature, animals, or beauty, because your system does not just skim the surface, it takes things in deeply, deeply. And it can show up as being easily startled. I'm thinking of my husband sneezing. You know who you are. Because your nervous system is responsive. And it can show up as struggling with conflict. Not because you're weak, but because tension can feel physically loud. It can also show up as noticing when someone's mood changes, not because you're paranoid, because you are picking up subtle clues. And it can show up as needing time to make decisions, because you're processing multiple layers and possible outcomes. I always love to say, give yourself time to respond rather than react. It can show up also as feeling drained by small talk, because your system often prefers depth over performance. And it can show up as having a rich inner life, because deep processing often creates deep reflection. It can show up as crying easily, not because you're falling apart. Sometimes your body is just releasing what it's been holding. If I had $1 for every time my parents told me to stop crying when I was a child, I'd be very wealthy. What I like to say about crying is it's just water leaking from your face. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, and it's just releasing that pent-up energy. It can also show up as needing more transition time between tasks, people, or environments, because your nervous system does not always enjoy being flung from one energetic room to another, like a handbag on a chair. And it can also show up as being deeply affected by environments. As I've mentioned, shops, crowds, airports, open plan offices, oh God, no, hospitals, schools, family gatherings, restaurants with too much noise, rooms with unspoken tension, places where everyone is pretending things are fine when actually the energy says otherwise. Sensitive people often respond to atmosphere, not just what's said, not just what's seen, the whole field of a place. So many different layers. And this is where many sensitive women start to wonder, is this intuition? Is this empathy? Is this anxiety? Is this just my nervous system? Am I crazy? The answer may be yes, possibly, or some of the above, and definitely you're not crazy, which is why we need discernment. And this is the work that we will keep coming back to and addressing during this podcast, Sensitive and the City. Because not every feeling is actually intuition, and not every discomfort is a warning, and not every heavy room is yours to fix. Not every mood belongs to you, and not every reaction needs immediate interpretation. Sometimes your body is giving you information and asking for regulation at the same time. Sometimes your mind is building a story around a signal or a sensation. And, sometimes you're picking up on someone else. Maybe this is because you're tired. Maybe it's because you're hangry. Maybe it's because you've had too much caffeine and not enough protein. Maybe the problem is not your spiritual sensitivity, but the problem is that you are a mammal with a calendar. It's very inconvenient, but it's absolutely true. So rather than asking, what is wrong with me? We start asking better questions. What am I noticing? What am I feeling in my body? What happened before I started feeling this way? Have I eaten? Like you do the check-in. Have I had water? Have I had enough quiet or decompression? Have I been around someone intense? Have I been ignoring a boundary? Am I responding to the present moment? Or is this an old pattern that's being activated in me? Is this even mine to carry? Or again, is this just simply information that I'm receiving? This is the shift from sensitivity as chaos to sensitivity as intelligence. And that shift requires you to build a relationship with your nervous system and your body. Not to dominate it, not to shame it, and not to outsource it, but to build a deep and loving and kind, very important word here, relationship with it. Because your nervous system is not trying to ruin your life, it's trying to protect you. It is constantly scanning for safety, for connection. It's scanning for threat and pressure, for change, demand, and emotional tone. And if you're highly sensitive, that scan may be more finely tuned. As I've said, this can be a beautiful thing. It can help you sense what's needed and help you to respond with care and create safe spaces and notice patterns early. It can help you know when something is off before the facts arrive wearing a name tag. But if that scanning is running all the time without rest and without boundaries, without regulation, it becomes exhausting. You cannot live your whole life as a human antenna with no off switch. And you need some practices that bring you back into your body, because you're seeking external permission to stop monitoring everyone else, where in fact the permission resides within you. You need time when no one needs anything from you and you can just completely decompress. I think the term that the young people are using is rotting. You also need to surround yourself with people who do not punish you for having limits and boundaries and for taking care of yourself, because you need to remember that being available is not the same thing as being loving. And that being sensitive does not mean being endlessly accessible to everyone. Let me say that again because it matters. Being sensitive does not mean being endlessly accessible. You can be loving and have clear and strong boundaries. You can be intuitive and still ask really clear, intelligent questions. You can be compassionate and still say no. You can care about people and still refuse to become the emotional storage unit for their unprocessed life. You can be sensitive and you can be strong. In fact, sensitivity often requires a very specific kind of strength, not the loud, armored, performative kind, think warrior, but the quieter kind, the kind that says, I know what I feel, but I don't have to be ruled by it. The kind that says, I can sense your disappointment and I'm still allowed to choose myself. The kind that says, this room feels heavy, but I don't have to carry it home. The kind that says, my body is giving me information and I will listen before I collapse. And the kind that says, I'm not too sensitive, I'm learning how to be responsible for my sensitivity. And that is a super powerful identity shift. Because being responsible for your sensitivity does not mean blaming yourself for it. It means you're learning how to work with it and you're learning what that entails. It means you're learning what drains you and what restores you, and also, so importantly, what your early warning signs are. It also means respecting your recovery time and creating those boundaries before resentment becomes your personality. And, understanding the difference between intuition and hypervigilance and being support versus self-sacrifice. Most importantly, it means no longer using sensitivity as either a wound or a badge. Because sometimes in the spiritual and personal development space, sensitivity gets placed on a strange little pedestal. It becomes, I'm sensitive, therefore I'm special. Or I am empathic, therefore everyone must adjust to me. Or I feel everything, therefore I cannot be responsible for my reactions. And that is not where we are going with this series. Sensitivity is real. It deserves respect, but it also needs maturity. It is not a free pass to avoid difficult conversations. It is not an excuse to refuse growth, and it's not a reason to make everyone else responsible for your nervous system. And it's certainly, definitely not something that can be weaponized. A healthy, sensitive identity says, this is how my system works. I honor it, I support it, I take responsibility for it, and I stop abandoning myself to make other people more comfortable. That is the middle path. Not shame, not superiority, but self-understanding. And this brings us to one of the most important things sensitive women need to learn. You need to know your signs of overload, because overload often builds quietly. It does not always arrive with a dramatic announcement. It may begin as irritation, like you're feeling snappy. Everyone annoys you. Someone chewing becomes like a personal attack. It might show up as fogginess. You can't really think clearly. You start forgetting things, and simple tasks feel oddly difficult. It might show up as like emotional flooding. So you cry over something small, not because the thing is small, but because your capacity is full. And it might also show up as avoidance. You don't want to reply, you don't want to leave the house, you don't want to be touched, and you don't want to be perceived by another living human. It might show up as control, right? You need the house clean and tidy and perfect, and you need the plan clear. You need people to stop changing things because your system cannot process one more moving part. Maybe it shows up as resentment because you have been saying yes while your body has been saying absolutely not, Margaret. Who is Margaret? No idea, but she needs to stop. The point is, overload has signals, and those signals are not failures. They're invitations for you to respond sooner. And that's honestly the practical part of sensitivity. You can't wait until you're completely fried before you care for yourself. You have to learn the early signs. Maybe you can even write this down so you start to notice, like, when my jaw tightens, I need a pause. When noise starts to feel physically aggressive, I need quiet. When I'm reading too much into everything, I need to regulate before I interpret. When I want to cancel or burn down my whole life, I might instead just need 20 minutes alone. When I start feeling responsible for everyone, I actually need to just simply return to myself. When I feel heavy after a conversation, I need to ask, is this even mine? Do I need to carry this? The answer is no. And when I feel overwhelmed by basic tasks, I need to reduce input, not attack my character. This is how sensitivity becomes workable, not by forcing yourself through everything, not by wrapping yourself in cotton wool and avoiding life, but by becoming aware of capacity. Because your capacity is not fixed, right? Think of it like your cycle. Some days you can handle more, some days you can handle less. That doesn't make you inconsistent. It makes you a human woman. And for sensitive women, capacity can be affected by sleep, hormones, stress, grief, workload, conflict, nutrition, environment, social exposure, emotional labor. You get it, right? And actually, whether you've had any time to recover or just sat down while scrolling through everyone else's nervous system on Instagram, because that's not rest. That is a nervous system buffet, and not a good one. So one of the most practical things that you can do as a sensitive woman living in a modern, very loud world is to begin checking your capacity before you commit, respond, decide, or react. Ask yourself simply, do I have the capacity for this today? Not, should I be able to? Right? You may have heard me say this before, and you're probably going to hear me say this again. Stop shooting all over yourself. And you have to ask yourself, would someone else be fine with this? Not, will they be annoyed if I say no? But do I have the capacity? This question alone can change so much. Because many sensitive women do not burn out because they're weak. They burn out because they're constantly spending capacity that they don't actually have. It's kind of like a capacity credit card. They borrow from tomorrow, they override today. They push through, they keep the peace, they keep showing up. And then they wonder why their body sends them a strongly worded letter in the form of exhaustion or burnout. So let's bring this into a simple practice you can use. I call this a sensory check-in. It's not complicated, and in fact, it's meant to be simple. Because, if it's complicated, you're not going to use it. Let's be truthful. Let's be honest with ourselves here, girls. It is meant to be simple, because when you are overloaded, you don't need the 12-step ritual involving 17 crystals, a moon phase, and a spreadsheet, and an 8 step skincare routine. You need to come back to yourself. So, when you're feeling overwhelmed, heavy, anxious, irritated, or full, pause and ask. Well, actually, firstly, pause, connect in with your body, connect in with yourself. What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I feeling in my body? What emotional atmosphere am I noticing? What do I actually need right now in this moment? That's it. Let's walk through it. What am I hearing? Maybe there is too much background noise. Maybe the television is on. Maybe people are talking over each other. Maybe your phone is pinging. Or maybe your own thoughts are loud because you have had no space all day. What am I seeing? Is there clutter? Too much light or too much bright light? Too much movement? Too many tabs open? Too much visual input? Sometimes your environment is quietly demanding attention from you. Next, what am I feeling in my body? Tight chest, heavy, uplifted shoulders, jaw clenching, stomach turning, head pressure, fatigue, restlessness, a desire to flee into the pantry and eat something crunchy with unnecessary force. Again, it's all information. Okay, now let's look at what emotional atmosphere am I noticing? Is there tension in this room? Is someone upset? Is there pressure? Is there expectation or a feeling of urgency? Is the environment emotionally loud even if no one is speaking? And finally, what do I actually need right now? Not what should I need, not what is convenient, not what makes me look low maintenance, but what do I need? What do I actually need? Quiet, rest, food, water, a walk outside in nature, a clear boundary, a clearer conversation, a break from my screens. Do I need to leave? Do I need to stop replying? Do I need to put down my phone? Do I need to remind myself this feeling is information, not an instruction? And that final line is important because a feeling is information, but it's not always an instruction. Sensitive people often feel something and immediately respond. You feel tension, so you fix it. You feel sadness, so you absorb it. You feel someone's disappointment, so you change your boundary. You feel discomfort, so you assume something's wrong and it's probably your fault. But part of becoming a regulated, sensitive woman is learning to pause between feeling and responding. That pause is where your power comes back. That pause lets you ask, is this mine? Is this true? Do I need to act or can I just regulate? Am I responsible for this or am I simply aware of it? My gosh, that's so important, that last one. And that is the difference between being sensitive and being swallowed by sensitivity. So, before we close, I want to speak directly to the woman who has spent years feeling like she is too much. Actually, spent years being told she is too much. Too emotional, too affected, too intense, too easily drained, too aware, too reactive, too complicated, too hard to please, and too sensitive. I want you to consider that maybe you were never too much. Maybe you were undersupported. Maybe you were overstimulated. Maybe you were carrying emotional weight that wasn't actually yours. Maybe as a small child, you were actually taught to ignore your limits, and you've continued to do that as a grown woman. Maybe you were trained to be pleasant and agreeable instead of being honest. Maybe your nervous system has been trying to get your attention for years, and you kept calling it weakness because that's what the world taught you to do. But your sensitivity is not weakness. It's responsiveness, it's depth, and it is perception. It is a way of noticing what others may miss. And it needs care. It needs boundaries and recovery and regulation. And it needs you to stop handing it to people who do not know how to respect it. But it's not wrong. And you are not wrong. And the goal is not to become less sensitive. The goal is to become more skillful with your sensitivity, more aware of your capacity, more honest about your limits, more connected to your body, and more discerning about what you take on. You also need to be more willing to let other people have their feelings without immediately making them your assignment. That is where sensitivity becomes strength. Not because you stop feeling, because you stop abandoning yourself inside everything you feel. And that's the foundation of Sensitive in the City. This series is for the woman who feels deeply, but literally is done being overwhelmed by everything she notices. It is for the empath who is learning that not everything she feels is hers. And it is for the highly sensitive person who needs real-world tools, not another vague reminder to, quote-unquote, protect your energy, bubble yourself in white light, while life keeps on lifing. It is for the intuitive woman who knows her body speaks, but also knows that intuition is clearer when the nervous system is regulated. And it's for the version of you who's ready to stop asking, how can I become less sensitive, and start asking, how do I support the way that I'm actually built? Like, let's use this to my advantage, for heaven's sake. Because this is where the work begins. So if you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. You're not too sensitive, but your sensitivity does need support. It needs space and recovery and honest boundaries. And it needs you to stop pretending that you're fine when your whole system is waving a tiny red flag with surprising commitment. Sensory processing sensitivity means your nervous system is taking in more information and processing it more deeply. That can be beautiful. It can make you intuitive, perceptive, compassionate, creative, and deeply aware. But without regulation, it leaves you feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, emotionally flooded, and convinced that there is definitely something wrong with you. There isn't. You may just simply be living with a highly responsive nervous system in a very overstimulating world. And the answer is not to shame yourself into being tougher. The answer is to learn how to listen sooner and to notice when you're reaching your capacity. To give yourself permission to step back before you collapse. To ask, is this mine? Is this too much, or do I need to regulate before I decide what this means? That is where your sensitivity becomes less chaotic and more intelligent. Not because you shut it down, but because you finally start working with it properly. In the next episode, we're going to look at why modern life feels so loud when you're highly sensitive, and how everyday environments can quietly overload your system before you even realize what's happening. So please do make sure you subscribe. It really does help. And follow the playlist and stay with me for season 1 of Sensitive in the City. We're going to look at sensitivity in the real world, crowds, work, relationships, emotional overwhelm, boundaries, energy, intuition, recovery, and how to live as a sensitive woman without becoming a sponge for everything around you. Until then, please, please be gentle with yourself and with your nervous system. Not indulgent, not avoidant, just honest, because your sensitivity is not the problem. The lack of support around it usually is. And as I love to say, regulation first and intuition follows. And I'll see you in the next episode.